patriarchal chief. That elite was an ultra.
Today we're going to be talking about, yet again, race and the Book of Mormon, because it is one of the most critical subjects that exists for modern members of the church to grasp. That is the idea of official declaration 2, and all the politics of today very much revolve around the idea of identity, whether that's racial identity, ethnic identity, sexual orientation identity. There's so much of it is about identity. And so this is super important for us to understand as Mormons. What is our identity? And today, Jared Taylor is out there tweeting that the Book of Mormon is the most explicitly pro-white holy book ever written. The same day that the church's PR team is putting out tweets about their new collaborative project with the NAACP. So clearly this is ideological battleground. This is where a lot of the action is. And so I feel like discussing it is just so important because it is something that your average member does not understand very well, largely because the brethren are not allowed to teach about it. We're not allowed to put it in the manuals, that sort of thing. So we've talked a lot about Ephraimite identity, the British Israelite, the curse of Cain, these sorts of ideas. But in the modern context, we tend to think of them in the way we think about like a 23andMe test, which DNA tests are real. They maybe are giving us a slightly fuzzy picture, because a lot of it's based on like biostatistics and all that garbage, which is not exactly foolproof. But it is a good, reliable thing. I mean, you can take a DNA test and know where someone is from. So it's pretty reliable, and it's a real thing. Now, they didn't have DNA tests back in Joseph Smith's day. And so when we're reading some of the statements about lineage, it can get a little confusing, and it's possible to spin them in a way that says, oh, well, it's not a DNA test, it's not DNA, it's just metaphorical, that's not how they thought about it. But that is how they thought about it. They just didn't have DNA tests, so they thought about it a little differently. What did they have? They had eyeballs, like they had what they could see. And with like an animal or people, they know that in a family you can have 10 kids, and one of them could have, a particular eye color that the rest of the siblings do not have. Myself, I do not have the same hair color as my siblings. And so you can think of it like a trait, like an eye color or a hair color. And when Joseph Smith was talking about the priesthood, he kind of talked about the priesthood almost like it's a trait. Like the Ephraimite gene is a trait that you might come across in a family. Out of a family of 6 siblings, one might have the trait. And how do you know that this person has that trait? Is that they will accept the fullness of the gospel. And when you accept the Spirit, receive the gift of the Spirit, it will have different effects on you depending on how much of that trait or blood, whatever you want to call it, is in you. And as you live the gospel, as you accept the gospel, they would say that, this will have a permanent effect on your blood, which presumably would be passed to your children. And, what we would call that today is like epigenetics, which are these studies where they've essentially done cruel things to little rats or whatever, while exposing them to a smell that a rat would never be exposed to, like maybe like some sort of bizarre fruity smell that they would never get in the wild, right? Cinnamon, something like that. Until the smell of cinnamon, like the Pavlovian dog, it will have this fear response on the rats. If I can find the study, I'll post it. But basically, across generations, this fear response is passed to the children of those rats, even though they have never experienced the trauma that is associated with that, with the stimulus or whatever, with the smell. They will still have the same trauma response. And so that's what epigenetics is, and that's kind of how they describe the effect that the Spirit can have on you. And so when they're talking about this, about gathering the blood of Ephraim from the whole world, which has been scattered through the whole world, people say, well, people in the whole world are not all the same ethnically, so they must not be talking about race. And that's not entirely true. They mostly talked about how the blood of Ephraim was primarily in Northwestern Europe. There's like a list of countries that Brigham Young gave that are those are the main countries where their efforts were focused. And of course, they said, there are exceptions. You could find an Ephraimite anywhere, but that's just, that's our culture. We're charitable. We're all these things. And so, it wasn't entirely strict that, just because one person out of 1,000 or 100 or whatever looks a little bit different than what we would expect an Ephraimite to look like, that wasn't a huge concern to them. But we shouldn't let that pollute our vision of what their overall general understanding of where the blood of Ephraim was, who it was, that sort of thing. And so, how did they have a DNA test for Ephraimites back in, the early saints' day? Because they didn't, what were they going to have people spit in a cup? Or are they going to measure their ears or their skull shape or something? No, that's not what they were doing. What they did is they used the gospel. The gospel is the DNA test, because only someone with these traits, with the blood of Ephraim, is going to respond to the message of the fullness of the gospel. And this is why watering down the gospel or changing the message or our approach is so problematic, is because it's going to change the types of people that the message reaches. It's going to change the filter. If preaching the gospel is our filter as to kind of gathering out the blood of Ephraim from the world, then if we change the message, we're going to be gathering out other blood. And then we're going to be mingling it with the blood of Ephraim, which, the book of Abraham and the book of Mormon warn us against this. And this is why intermarriage in the early days of the church was so forbidden. And it was seen as so bad, because if you marry outside of the faith, you're betraying the blood of Ephraim and you're bringing potentially cursed lineage, non-Ephraimite lineage, people who are not responsive to the gospel. You're bringing those traits into your lineage, right? Potentially cursing your children with unbelief. And so I think that if we were able to speak to Joseph or Brigham Young or John Taylor about the gospel message today and how we've kind of changed our approach, it would be no surprise to them that the profile of the average convert has changed dramatically as well. And, I'm all for casting a wide net, like everyone should be able to hear the gospel. But I think that if we aren't sharing the fullness of the gospel, then we aren't doing our part of sorting the fishes. Because that's part of preaching the gospel too, is that you cast the wide net, but you also need to sort the fishes. You can't just bring them all in. You can't just bring in all the fishes. That's not how it works. It's a big concern to me that it feels like the message of the gospel, the target audience is no longer intelligent people. It's no longer people who look like the early saints. It's no longer those people. It is different people. It's a different message. It's different people. We tend to do best in countries where the average IQ is the lowest. And this is a real problem. I think this is a really big problem, and it's kind of a shameful thing, and I feel like we're doing ourselves a disservice. I think that we should try and have the message targeted towards the smartest people possible. And that's where we should focus our efforts. We've been rejoicing that we're baptizing more people in Europe. Oh, people say you don't baptize in Europe, but you can. And it's like, yeah, the people you're baptizing in Europe aren't Europeans. They're not Europeans. So why are we bragging about it? And let's be honest, the blood of the British people and some of these European countries has been scattered throughout the whole world. The European diaspora is all over the planet. Anyway, if you change the message, you're changing the filter, you're going to change which kind of people you're converting, and that ultimately is going to change the demographics of the church. And the demographics of the church, like it or not, play a huge role on what doctrines we are willing to accept and live. This sounds really horrible to say, but it's a little crazy to me to tell people on the sub-Saharan African continent that if they pay their tithing, that they will escape poverty. It just feels wrong to me, because the sub-Saharan African continent has been poor seemingly forever. And while there are, statistical anomalies do exist and people do escape that, like there's a bell curve there just like there is everyone else. And so there are African geniuses, because that's just how statistics works. It is insane to me to tell these people that by living a lower principle of the gospel, such as tithing, will lift the curse of Cain or something. Like that's crazy to me. And maybe Brigham Young is the biggest, meanest person out there, but at least he wouldn't lie to people like that. Maybe his answer is a little bit more cruel, but what's the truth? Do you really think that we're going to be able to change the African continent through taking 10% of their money? We've tried giving them trillions of dollars and that didn't work. We gave them literally trillions of dollars and that didn't help them escape poverty. Do you think that them paying 10% is going to help them escape poverty? So we need to be interested in the truth. And the truth is kind of like a knife. Sometimes it hurts. There's parts of the gospel that are hard to accept. I've had a hard time accepting them. Sometimes I'm just like, gee, 50% of the people born are men, and we're not going to be monogamous? That seems like a recipe for problems. So there are hard things to accept in the gospel. But ultimately, if you are going to look for truth and reality and telling people the truth, it's that some of the problems of this world and the unfairness of where you're born and what sort of genetic inheritance you have is not fixable. You can't. There's no pill that you can take to change your height. There's no pill you can take to change your ability to think. I mean, you can learn to read better. Obviously, growing up starving does lower your intelligence. And so we can solve the malnutrition stuff, but once you reach your full height, you're not going to get taller. And it's insane to assume that IQ is something different. And so the early brethren of the church, people like to say how they're liars, they're all these things, they're just racists. And it's like, at least they wouldn't have lied to us about that. They wouldn't have pretended that differences that are plain to see aren't there. And they would have told us about who we are and what our role is as the blood of Ephraim. And the point of being blessed is to serve other people, okay? And I think that Northwestern Europeans, if we're going to say Northwestern Europeans are the scattered 10 tribes, then the world has been blessed through them. Like penicillin, the transistor, the discovery of DNA. The guy who invented the transistor and the guy who discovered DNA, they're just blatant racists all the time, every time. What is with that? So weird. They must be liars. That must be how they got so smart, is by lying to themselves constantly. Let's acknowledge the truth. We don't need to be cruel to people or lord over people, but I think that telling people who have been poor since they were discovered and seemingly forever that 10% of their money gone is going to make them richer, let's just be real, okay? Blessings from God do exist, but prosperity gospel, I don't know, okay? I don't think that tithing is an investment that you're going to get 11% back for every 10% you put down. That's not how it works, okay? It's just a sacrifice, and it's good. It's good. It helps protect you from greed, I think that if you're not going to just say tithing is a sacrifice, I think you're being dishonest, because, I don't know, maybe this is me being weak of faith, but it's I think that 10% less is 10% less. You can't tell me that it's got a 15% net positive. That's crazy. At least in the financial realm. You're lying. You're lying if you say otherwise. So I think that a lot of people have experienced miracles from paying their tithing or whatever, but I think that those miracles only happen because we live in America. And if you lived in the jungle where people are trying to crack your head open and look for gold nuggets, then maybe those blessings wouldn't happen when you pay your tithing, okay? Maybe if you live in a place where there's child soldiers and horrible flesh-eating flies or whatever, maybe those blessings aren't exactly going to be right around the corner. Maybe it's just you live in America. Maybe that's me being of little faith. I don't know. But let's just tell the truth, okay? Let's not try to deny miracles, but when we're preaching the gospel, let's just tell the truth. Let's just tell it how it is. Tithing is just a sacrifice. That's just what it is. And the only way that you cannot pay it is by, running a little business or whatever, or not working. Which, maybe you should look into that. No work, no tithing. Seems great. Seems great to me. So, neats rule, wages drool. You don't have to pay tithing. So, those are my thoughts for today. Hope you have a good one, and stay faithful.